So welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. And again, my name is Reverend Alice Reed, and I'm here to speak to you on this idea of listening to your heart. That is our topic for this month. And today's theme, today's topic is this idea of our life's great work is you. I want to start first just by doing as we always do, and that is to do an invocation. So join me if you will. Just close your eyes and know with me that we are indeed blessed by each other's company, that we have come together in this virtual way of being to remember that even when we look like we are apart, we are not. We are indeed love. We are the love that has incarnated into the world as each one of us, as each individual, as all the 7.7 billion people in the world. Spirit so wanted to experience itself in such vast ways that it created each and every one. And I know that at the heart of that creation is power and beauty and indeed love. And so as we move forth today, as we explore this idea of life's great work, I know that each one is opened. Minds are open, hearts are opened, insight is open, creativity flows. And I'm so grateful that we have this time together. I simply release this knowing it is done, and it is with a grateful and surrendered heart that I simply give this back from whence it came. And so it is. So, we are talking about this idea of life's great work is you. And it's a little bit of a takeoff on a book that I may have shared with you before. It's a book I'm very familiar with. It's called The Great Work of Your Life. And it's written by a man by the name of Stephen Cope. And Stephen starts his work with, in the introduction, where he begins with this quote from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. And the quote goes like this: "If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, it will destroy you." And he's really talking about this idea that when we live into our authentic self, that is really what carries us forward. That's the momentum. That's the power that moves us, is actually tapping into that authenticity that wants to be expressed by means of you. There is a power and a presence, and it can only express as 100% you, through you, by you, and as you. And so when he talks about this idea of to bring forth what is within you, it will save you, he's not talking about saving in some kind of Christian sense, but really it's this opportunity for us to begin to lean into our gifts and to really share our talents with the world and with ourselves. And that when we doubt ourselves, when we have this lack of faith in ourselves, but that's when we suffer. In other words, you are to let your light shine or live in the dark. The book goes on to talk about, in allegory, Stephen Cope couches the whole text of the book in the allegory of the Bhagavad Gita and the story of Arjuna. Arjuna is the hero of the story, and the Bhagavad Gita is this allegory and a philosophy and a system of practice that is really about healing the divide between our humanity and our divinity. David Wagner says it this way: "The philosophy and system of practice outlined in the Gita is about healing the divide between our humanity, with all its ups and downs, and our divinity, the innate, unconditional, unwavering, sacred power that dwells within us." And so Stephen begins to use this allegory to really talk about how important it is for us to step into our greatness, not our greatness in this sense of I want to be better than everybody else, but that greatness, about the power that wants to express by means of us. And so he talks about Arjuna, our hero in the tale, who is he's really brought up to be a warrior, and he's an excellent warrior, and his little town is very concerned about another group of people that want to change the way they're living, and so they're preparing for battle. And Arjuna finds himself a chariot driver, and unbeknownst to him, that chariot driver is none other than Krishna, who represents our higher wisdom self, represents Source. And so Krishna is going to help him and actually do the mechanics of driving the chariot while Arjuna does the fighting. And they get up to the battleground, and as Arjuna looks across the battlefield, he sees his relatives. He sees his sisters, his brothers, his uncles. He probably didn't see his sisters, but his uncles and his brothers and his cousins that are ready to do battle for what they have believed in. And so when he looks across and he sees these people that are, in metaphysical terms, he sees himself, right? He sees the projection of himself in his family. It levels him. He is brought to his knees. He drops to the floor of the chariot, and he tells his chariot driver, I can't do this. I cannot fight my family. I cannot go into battle against them. So if we look at this allegory and we look at this place that Arjuna finds himself, it feels to me like there's some relational aspect here to our current situation. When I think about the coronavirus, it's really leveled us. This little invisible germ has completely shifted our way of life. It has brought us to our knees. It has sent us into our homes. And we're uncertain, as Arjuna was, we're uncertain about what all this means and what are we supposed to do and what is it that's being called forth right now. If you're like me, I've gotten a little comfortable with my shelter in place. It's, I've kind of cocooned into my home, and I've made everything very nice and comfortable, and I've found a way to, get what I need, and it's gotten a little too comfortable, actually. It's gotten a little too comfortable. And I find that when I look out and even consider going back out into the world, that there's some discomfort. It creates a little anxiety in me, I'll be honest. But I think that we're not meant to stay in the cocoon. We're not meant to stay in this place, of comfort that we've created. That, yes, this was meant to keep us safe, but it's temporary. And so when we think about this place we're in as humanity, that we've had to pull back from life, we've had to pull back from what we've all known, and it's been our reality, the existence of the way the world works, and suddenly the world isn't working that way anymore, and we're needing to find different ways to be in this moment in time. As we move into that, I think that we have to be very mindful that there's I'm going to talk about myself for a minute, and I'm going to imagine that many of you are having the same experience. And that is that while I have created this safety for myself within my home, what sort of crept in very subtly and almost like I didn't even see it coming, but what started to creep in is fear. I've allowed myself to give credibility to this, as Emma Curtis Hopkins refers to it, sin, sickness, and death. I've allowed myself to give credibility to limitation. I've allowed myself to give credibility to lack. And that's not to say that I should be pretending it's not there. I need to be mindful in this moment. But there's a really fine line that we're walking here in this experience of shelter in place and staying safe. And I find that it's really easy to allow the subtleties of fear to creep in. For those of you that are gardeners, you might have had the experience of working with the plants in your garden, and you find that sometimes there's a weed that slips right in next to the plant, and it looks a lot like the plant, and it's almost disguised as the plant, and it begins to intertwine its roots with the healthy desired plant. Well, I think that's kind of what's going on right now for a lot of us. And while we have, I'm sure you're reading the news, there's a lot of states that are beginning to open up again. I think it's time for us to begin to look at where we might have allowed fear to creep in and integrate with this idea of safety. And I think it's time for us to look at that, to see where we might be out of alignment with our selves and with who we want to be in the world. And as the Gita talks about, to find that place where we can heal that divide between our humanity and our divinity. In Stephen's book, he talks about Arjuna's path as the four pillars of Dharma. And those four pillars are looking to your Dharma, which requires some introspection and really beginning to get a sense of what it is that's ours to do. Doing that full out with our whole selves, letting go of the outcome, number 3, and number 4, turning it over and having faith. And what we would say as religious scientists is giving it to the law. And so I want to focus on the first 2 pillars today as we look at this topic. And I want to, bring in another body of work by Gay Hendrick called The Great Leap. And The Great Leap is a story, a book that really talks about our zones of expression and how we can sometimes use comfort to get stuck in one of those zones of expression. And so the 4 zones of expression that Gay talks about they are the zone of incompetence, the zone of competence, the zone of excellence, and the zone of genius. And I want to talk about each one of those, and I've got a little slide to share with you. Here we have the zone of incompetence, which incompetence is not a popular word. It doesn't bring to mind anything that is really motivating or invigorating, but really what we're just talking about are those activities that you're not good at. We all have activities we're not good at. And the graph that I have for you has 2 axes. One is the best use of our time, and the other is the best use of our talent. And so if you look at that, the smallest block there in the zone of incompetence, well, that's the least best use of our time and the least best use of our talent. And when we move into the zone of competence, well, this is the best use of our talent. These are activities that we're good at, but so is everybody else. So it's a good use of our talent, but it's maybe not the best use of our time. When we move into our zone of excellence, this is where I think most of humanity lives. It's that zone where we do some activities extremely well, and oftentimes this is the places where we find ourselves in our vocation, where we're making a living at it. The problem with the zone of excellence is that we get stuck there because it might not be the best use of your time and talent. The best use of your time and talent is the zone of genius. And this is a set of activities that you are uniquely designed to do. This is the zone that liberates us so that we can really express our divine genius. And when we don't move into this, it's actually easy to stay comfortable in the zone of excellence because it's safer. it's safer. And if we go back to our hero in the Gita allegory, Arjuna, he was in his zone of excellence. And he, in the story, he's really being called to his zone of genius, which means that he may need to let go of his zone of excellence so that he can really live in his zone of genius. As we are, operating in this world that, doesn't look like it used to, and everybody's sort of, there's a lot of confusion. I think people are doing their best. I think people are trying to, there's a lot of people operating in the zone of incompetence, mainly because they don't have the talent, because this is new. We've never experienced this before. Nowhere on the planet have we ever experienced a global pandemic where we were all so connected at the same time. We've had pandemics before, but they were very isolated experiences in the little pockets of the planet where they happened. This time, we're with each other. We're seeing what's happening on the other side of the globe. And so this is really a new time for us. And I think that we're operating at a lot of these different levels. Some of us are operating at a zone of excellence. Some people are operating at a zone of competence. But in order for us, I think, to really come through this in a way that's going to mean something, I think we have to lean into our zone of genius. And that might mean letting go of our zone of excellence. That might mean letting go of the things that you've gotten a lot of atta-girls from. That might mean doing the things that you really love, even though you're not sure, because you've never done them before, or because it's new, or because you've had some self-doubt. The things that get in the way of our genius, of course, and living from that zone of genius, is our comfort zone. And this shelter in place experience has created the perfect, the perfect conditions for creating a cocoon of comfort and safety. And yet, if in order for us to be operating from our zone of genius, we're going to need to step out of our safety, not to put ourselves in harm's way, but to stretch. And if we want to be part of creating a world that works for everyone, we need to begin to understand that a world that works for everyone requires that we step out of our comfort zone a little bit, that we actually step out of our comfort zone a lot. I think this place of safety that we've created for ourselves is temporary. It's and it can begin to feel like it's the new now, it's the new normal, but it's not. And in order to fly, we have to let go of the cocoon of our comfort zone and begin to learn how to stretch. But wanting to stretch is not going to be enough to motivate us, to pull us forward. There's a great quote, and I think I heard it from Michael Beckwith, and he said, but I've heard it in other places too, and it's this idea that pain pushes and passion pulls. So as we begin to look at this idea of our genius zone, we are pulled into it through our passion. And in fact, what is really going to draw us out in a big way is love. To remember that, when we ground our passion in love for humanity, love for the activity we do, love for the work that we're doing, that it's love that's going to bring us forward. And that's where the heart has to come in. And we have to begin to be deep listeners of our heart. And what's going to get in the way of listening is fear. What's going to get in the way of listening is getting too comfortable, being too safe. What I want to invite you to do is to begin to explore what your genius zone might be. Living in our genius zone, we are really working and doing the work that we love. We're being in the world through the activities and the opportunities to connect and to be a presence in the world by means of our deep love for humanity and for ourselves. What I think has happened is that the world has learned all that it can from self-mastery. That it's time for us to move beyond self-mastery. And there's a wonderful, as I was reading the great work of your life, and Stephen Cope was quoting the Gnostic gospel according to Thomas, I began to explore more of that work, and I found this wonderful quote that I want to share with you. And I have it right here. And it, divine grace that accomplishes everything through us, but only when the individual suspends the egotistic self, silencing the mental being and calming the emotions, thus allowing divine grace to act without obstruction. And so, in order to be in our genius zone, we have to be willing to let go of some of the mastery that we have created over the years, and to begin to stretch ourselves into our genius zone. And the really cool thing about being in the genius zone is it doesn't feel like work, right? It feels like play. We're in the zone. We lose track of time, where our hearts are full and we are fulfilled, not by a paycheck or some kind of material attainment, but we're fulfilled by the work. That work doesn't even feel like the appropriate term for it. The interpreter that I'm working with is a fellow by the name of Tao Malachi, and he goes on to say, as he's exploring verse 67, he goes on to explain that it should be clear that the path is about self-transcendence, service to others, and service to spirit. So as we look at this place of being in our genius zone, it isn't about, more worldly success. It's about true embodied fulfillment. And what I know is that love is always our guide to true embodied fulfillment. So my invitation to you this week is to look for the zone of excellence that you've probably been operating from, and see how some of this may be inhibiting you from really operating from your zone of genius. In your zone of genius, this is the place where your life's work and contributing to your sacred calling comes forward. This is the place where we begin to move beyond self-fulfillment and step into the fulfillment of all humanity. And that sounds like a huge undertaking, but the truth is, when we all do our part and begin to work together, there's something magical that happens in the zone of genius, because I don't even have to figure out how my part works with your part. It just does. Because when we can begin to live from our highest and our best, not only do we get lifted up, but we lift each other up, and we move to that place where we can truly create a world that works for all. There's some big ideas to look at right now. We're getting ready as a world, as a planet, or let's just talk about the US, we're getting ready to do some reentry. How do you want to re-enter? How do you want to step back out into life? How do you want to reconnect? It's not going to happen overnight. But if you're like me, I'm going to need to move my mind to a place of expansion and a place of of self-transcendence, big words, but because right now my world has gotten really small. And I imagine yours has too. So it's time to begin to court this idea of what's next. It's time to make space for it. It's time to begin to look at who you want to be in this next level of being in community together. There are people in our leadership who are calling all our members. And if you don't get a phone call, please call the center and let us know. We think we have everybody's name, but we're really trying to explore what's next for everyone. And I think we can come back together as a community face to face, but that it's going to require a couple of incremental steps. So I hope that you'll be open to some suggestions about how we can do that, how we can support each other, and how we can walk this out together as a community. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I want to go ahead and close with a spiritual mind treatment. I know that there's a power and a presence that is everywhere present. There's no place that it is not. And as we move forward on this thing called being back and being a part of again, I know that we aren't doing this alone. That not only do we support each other, but we are divinely supported by Spirit. That in fact, when we know that everything is God, that Spirit is everywhere present, that there's always a creative process, then there's nothing for us to doubt or worry about. There's no reason for us to be in fear. Instead, we allow ourselves to be carried and embraced by the power and the presence that lives within and all around us. And so I know for each one, as we begin to entertain this idea of reentry, that we're gentle with ourselves, that we're mindful, and that we're conscious. And we begin to explore and cultivate the right choices for ourselves individually and the right choices for humanity. For we are indeed all in this together. And I give great thanks for knowing that each one of us is guided, guarded, and protected on the path towards self-transcendence. And I give great thanks for each and every soul, no matter what, that is walking this path right now. And I hold them up in love. And I refuse to see anything other than the highest and best in all of humanity. And it is that refusal to look away from beauty and love and power and grace that calls it forward. And I know for each one of us that we do this as well. And it is with gratitude that I speak this word, and I know that it is the action of the law that carries it forward. And I simply let this go, and we anchor this in that same love by saying, and so it is.